I'm sorry.
Done.
Thank you. So welcome everyone to the first presentation of our Center for Nonprofit NGO Studies research series. This year's theme is community engaged research. Today's talk is understanding USAID's legacy and alternatives. We have a couple co-sponsors, the Risk and Disaster Interest Group of the Society for Applied Anthropology and the Heart of Anthropology and Study of Inequality. Joeva, you can introduce your center at Stony Brook University. If we could add, Joeva, you can say a little bit of words about Stony Brook.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And hi, everyone. Really happy to be with you here today. Today's event is also co-sponsored by the Department of Anthropology at Stony Brook University, where I'm presently located, as well as the Center for Changing Systems of Power, an interdisciplinary applied center at Stony Brook, where I am honored to be an affiliate member at, that seeks to intervene academic research in real life and real world issues, such as the one that we'll be talking about today.
Thank you. And again, my name is Mark Schuler, Director of the Center for Nonprofit and NGO Studies at Northern Illinois University, where we're the Make a Difference major. We're trying to help train the next generation of civil society leaders to be good at doing good. So today's talk is about understanding USAID. The United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, closed officially as of September 2nd, 2025, had a complicated and at times contradictory legacy. Created during the height of the Cold War, President Kennedy imagined USAID as a vital tool in the U.S. foreign policy toolkit. Since its creation, USAID became the United States and the world's primary distributor of foreign development and humanitarian aid, with an annual budget of over $60 billion in 2024. Along with its stakeholders overseas, USAID was the first agency targeted by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency in February 2025. DOGE's cuts to the agency reduced USAID to a skeletal staff and suddenly ended life-saving services such as maternal health and antiretroviral treatments, impacting millions across the globe. While many have decried the end of USAID, its history and its legacy is complex. Its experience and research across the Global South, for instance, has shown that USAID's mandate to promote U.S. interests has led to negative consequences, increasing inequalities, empowering particular constituencies that have deepened and prolonged conflict, and engaging in regime change. This panel, spanning continents and experiences of practitioners and researchers, offers a timely reflection on this mixed legacy, tracking current impacts and identifying alternatives. We have panelists from a couple continents. So to start off, we have Angeline Annesteus, is the country director of ActionAid Haiti and the organizer and the lead of CLIO, the NGO, the National NGO Network in Haiti. She entered ActionAid in 2015 and worked 3 consecutive years as program officer and program coordinator. Angeline is a devoted young woman who has been very active, engaged in the fight for social and gender justice. The deteriorating social political situation of Haiti is the driving factor toward her commitments to contribute to systemic changes that are fundamental for a more equitable society where all Haitians can live with dignity. She earned a BA from Human Ecology from College of Atlantic, Maine, and currently pursuing a master's degree in business administration. We want to send a special thank you to Angeline for coming in last minute. We had someone in Haiti who was unable to attend because of an urgent situation, that she is still working for an NGO that needed to be away. So thank you, Angeline. And we have Belay is the co-founder and general coordinator for the Alliance for Global Food Sovereignty in Africa, or AFSA, a network of farmers organizations, NGO networks, consumer movements, and small-scale producers advocating for agroecology, food sovereignty, and the rights of small-scale food producers in Africa. He is a member of the IPES Food Panel and an expert on forestry conservation, indigenous livelihoods, and food and seed sovereignty. He is also founder of Mekla Ethiopia, an indigenous NGO working on agroecology, intergenerational learning, conservation of forests, and the livelihoods of local communities and indigenous people. He has played a significant part in the Africa Biodiversity Network, or ABN. He won the National Green Hero Award for both Ethiopia and Abeba, the capital city, in 2008. He's also a recipient of the Distinguished Alumni Award from Rhodes University of South Africa. He has a PhD in education and a Master's of Science in Tourism and Conservation and a BS in Biology. Special thanks for Emilian because it's 10 p.m. where he is. Thank you. Next, we have Jane Henrici is an independent researcher, analyst, and practitioner of gender and intersectionality issues in socioeconomic development with a specialization in disaster risk reduction and recovery on climate change adaptation. She has over 20 years of professional work across multiple nations and continents. She has studied, advised on, directed, and helped to design and implement programs to respond to an array of concerns. She has worked on projects for the World Bank, Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, various UN agencies, and USAID. In addition to her work as a senior level consultant, Dr. Henrici is a professional lecturer in the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University and currently adjunct instructor for the Department of Anthropology and NGO program at Northern Illinois University. Her doctorate is in socioeconomic anthropology. Then we have Daniel Oberko is the Regional Secretary for Africa and Arab Countries at Public Services International, or PSI, where he leads the work of over 165 trade unions across the continent and the MENA region, Middle East North Africa region. As organizer, campaigner, educator, and researcher with over a decade's experience, he has worked extensively on issues such as food security, climate change, trade, taxation, and digitalization. He has developed innovative training programs and advanced policy advocacy that empower workers and strengthen society's resilience. He holds a master's in labor policies and globalization from the University of Kassel and the Berlin School of Economics and Law, as well as a bachelor's in agricultural economics from the University of Ghana. He also holds various other professional certificates. He is passionate about building inclusive economies through social justice and an alternative to current neoliberal orthodoxy. And then finally, we have Dr. Joeva Rock is an assistant professor of anthropology at Stony Brook University. Her research focuses on the politics of development, examining how actors across scale shape foodways, agricultural technologies, and environments. She is author of the Margaret Mead Award winning "We Are Not Starving: The Struggle for Food Sovereignty in Ghana," she serves as the co-director of the Mapping Biotechnologies in Africa project and is currently working on a book that explores privatization of U.S. development aid through the lens of the long green revolution on the African continent. Thank you all for coming, and special thank you to the panelists. We'd like to start by asking people to please introduce yourself and your organization. What field are you working in? So we start with Million.
Do you hear me? Yes. My name is Belay. I'm the general coordinator of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. AFSA works on food systems in general, on agroecology.
Thank you. Daniel?
My name is Oberko Daniel. I'm the Regional Secretary for Public Services International. PSI is a global union federation with over 30 million membership. And in Africa, we are more than 1 million, and we have more than 100 trade union affiliates in more than 40 countries.
Angeline?
Thank you, Mike. Hi, everyone. My name is Angeline Annesteus. I am the Country Director for ActionAid in Haiti. In Haiti, ActionAid has been present since 1997. And we have been working mainly with women and youth as our constituencies. We work in the agricultural sector, women rights, gender issues, and education as a cost-cutting issue. Our work is basically seeking to contribute to social, economic, and climate justice in Haiti. Thank you and it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Joeva?
Hi, everyone. My name is Joeva Rock. As Mark mentioned, I'm an assistant professor of anthropology at Stony Brook University. I grew up in a household where my mom, who's on this call right now, worked in the development industry or world for most of her career. So I grew up thinking that I too would work in the development industry. And after college, went to work for an NGO in Ghana and learned very quickly that I had more questions than I had answers. And so I shifted gears and pursued a PhD in anthropology, where I've been studying the politics of international development, mainly in Ghana, where I work on questions related to food sovereignty, agricultural development, and kind of legacies of development in general.
Thank you. Jane?
Yeah, so I think the bio that you read about me covered. I'm an anthropologist. I'm a socioeconomic anthropologist primarily now, and yes, I'm speaking today primarily as a researcher and practitioner. So, yeah.
Thank you. So this is a discussion. We're going to be hearing perspectives on a multiple series of questions. Hopefully there will be time for open discussion afterward. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to note them in the chat. So let's move forward. So what has been your experience or interaction with USAID? What was the agency's impact on your field or your country? Jane, why don't we start with you about your experience interaction with USAID?
Okay. Although I kind of thought we were going to do this in a different format, that I would be talking about USAID's legacy rather than my personal experience, but I can go ahead and speak to that a little bit. So just over the years, sure, for the past few decades, I've done consulting work, and most of that has been with contractors contracted in turn to USAID on different projects. And like Angeline, I'm very concerned, particularly concerned with issues of disparity, focused primarily on issues of what are called, gender, and often referred to as intersectional issues. And yeah, some of those experiences with USAID have been good. Some of them have been not so great. Some of them have been very frustrating. But I think what I'm going to do later on, when we do start talking about the legacy, is I prefer to focus on the positive, not because there aren't criticisms and we could go on about those, but primarily because I think there are some things that I just don't want to be forgotten.
Thank you. And I do apologize for springing that. Just trying to establish our relationship with the agency. So how about Daniel?
Yeah, thank you very much. So my relationship with USAID, I think, started from 2010, when I was newly employed as a programs officer and an organizer for the General Agricultural Workers Union, a trade union organization. And then the General Agricultural Workers Union was part of a network called the Food Security Policy Advocacy Network, called FoodSpan. And that was also when there was strong implementation, or the implementation of the AU's Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program was being implemented and had received strong funding and momentum through the Barack Obama's Feed the Future program, but also through the Maputo Declaration. So that was how I began having an encounter with USAID. But also more specifically, because of my coordination of the food security network, I also happened to be part of the national level committee known as for the implementation or domestication of the CADEP program at the national level through the Ministry of Agriculture in Ghana's program called the Food Security Policy Program, known as FASDEP. And so that was how I experienced, or I encountered, USAID. And just like Jane said, for me, it gave me an opportunity to put myself first as a smallholder farmer, because as a trade union organization, we organize smallholder farmers. It also gave me an opportunity to put myself in the space of of someone, of an agro worker, because we organize workers in oil palm plantation, banana plantation, pineapple plantations, in cocoa. So it gave me that opportunity as well. And then thirdly, it gave me an opportunity to put myself in the shoes of someone in the space of policy advocacy, because our role was also around advocating for food security policies. And so we spoke on the issues of land and land grabbing. We spoke on the issues of biofuels and the process of land grabbing to produce biofuels, even including issues around climate change. So it allowed me put myself in several shoes. And for me, that is how my experience with USAID looks like. I'm sure that once the other questions come, it will give me, it will give me an opportunity to now pin down some of the practical situations. Thank you very much.
Mhm. Thank you. Million?
Million, you're on mute.
Okay. I was saying that probably before I talk about USAID, I think I didn't introduce AFSA very well. AFSA is a movement of movements. We have farmers networks, fisher folks, pastoralists, indigenous peoples, youth, women, and faith-based institutions, consumer associations. Over 200 million Africans as a constituency. Our members work in 50 of the 55 African countries. We work with both hands. We fight the appropriation of our water, our land, our seeds. We are against GMOs and the changing of biosafety regulations. So my personal experience with USA was both as the Melka Ethiopia and both also the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. I avoided USAID. We never requested funding from USAID. USAID kind of orchestrated the change in laws and regulations in relation to agriculture in Africa. It has influenced also the agricultural policies at the regional level in Africa. It's like a neo-colonial relationship that we felt that we had with USAID. The support by USAID to Africa, I think in 2024 it was about 8 billion, and out of that it was only 14% for economic growth, and agriculture was one of them, and then mostly it's to influence the policies and the implementation of some strategies through some organizations like the AGRA, Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, through the African Agricultural Technology Foundation. So it was a promotion of US business, US conglomerates, industrial agriculture and GMOs. It was promoting their interest. It's not. I mean, some of my friends tell me that it's not totally negative. There are some positive experiences, as Daniel said, but mostly my experience was very bad. But I must say that also there was a lot of support for health issues, especially over 70% of the support was for health, and a number of organizations, a number of countries were supported by that, and DEMIS of USAID in Africa has both negative and positive implications, and we'll talk about that a bit later.
Thank you. Daniel, in what ways has USAID historically influenced the direction of agricultural policy in Ghana since independence?
So I think it's quite interesting. One post-independence where we saw USAID, and for me, my interest is actually to highlight the fact that USAID's agricultural legacy in Ghana has evolved from one state capacity building in the early decades to market liberalization and privatization or strong private partnerships, and more recently, biotechnology advocacy. And I mean, just like countries that were considered advanced in terms of their level of industrialization, openness of their market, flexibility of labor market, and including various levels of commodification of natural resources. They also, I mean, they sought to keep the ties with independent nations, either through their multinational companies or through their development agencies, i.e. USAID. And so right from independence, where support was mainly towards the state. So for example, in the case of Ghana, support was mainly through the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, and then specific example through the University of Ghana Agriculture and Research Programs. So mainly they were through the state. And then post-independence, running through the structural adjustment program as a result of the fact that as a country, we're facing difficulties, we're in crisis. There was a crash of cocoa prices internationally. Our cocoa couldn't be bought. Also at the national level or at home, our cocoa farms were also ravaged by the swollen shoot disease. And so we're going through crisis. And so that there came the structural adjustment program. And so the advice of the IMF and the World Bank to institutions or to organizations like the USAID was to focus more on giving these interventions to the private sector or to private entities. And then that was how we had several programs looking at expansion of the growth of cash crops. So for example, in cocoa, in rubber, in cotton, oil palm, those were some of the interventions after the structural adjustment program. And then you move forward to more recently through USAID and the Feed the Future programs. I think that it's now very much centered on private participation strongly. It also centered more on commercialization very strongly. And just like others who I know will speak about, advocacy on adoption of biotechnology. And so this has been our history with USAID. And for Ghana, I think that at the time, for example, if you look at 2003 through to 2010, by then we're part of the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program. And so at the country level, we had a role or a responsibility to domesticate the CADEP through the medium-term agricultural investment programs. And so basically those programs had a number of objectives. And one, agricultural research and technology dissemination, institutional coordination and investment tracking, and other forms of interventions. But what I will say is that all these interventions enabled a post-independent country to have access to international markets, or basically that was the agenda, without properly assessing its own vulnerabilities and the mitigation measures available to it in the event of crisis. And for example, that is where we find ourselves, that is where we see ourselves at the moment. The withdrawal of the interventions or the support from USAID is revealing the various cracks within our economies and our dependence on a system which exposes our vulnerabilities, but in this time, in a very, very, risky, if there's a word like that, risky terms, or in a more riskier way, I should say. So I think that in terms of our history and in terms of how the intervention, specifically looking at the agricultural sector, this is the role USAID has played. In terms of how we see it from the different perspective, I'm sure that the next round of questions will allow me to talk about how, USAID is judged, one from the perspective of a smallholder farmer, from the perspective of government through the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, from the perspective of civil society organizations, from the perspective of trade unions and other researchers in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's shift gears a little bit here. So what was the impact on you when you heard that USAID's funding was going to be pulled, and later on September 2nd, when the agency was going to be closed for good? What impact is this closure going to have or has already had for your community, for your constituency, your sector, or the country? So Angeline, what was that impact on Haiti? Or the
Okay,
community?
yeah, I heard you. Thank you, Mark. Well, talking about the impact, let's say, it was a mixed feeling. It was a mixed feeling. Let's first clarify that ActionAid Haiti was not directly impacted by the cuts or these measures because we don't have USAID funding. However, in the first hand, for anyone working in the humanitarian or the development sector in Haiti, there is no way that you could not be impacted by these measures because, of course, the U.S. is the largest humanitarian development donor in Haiti, but also even in terms of security, the U.S. is the main donor supporting the international force led by Kenya here in Haiti. But when talking about, the court earlier this year, but also the closure of the USAID later on this year, I must say that we cannot talk about the immediate impact without going back a little bit to see also the U.S. policy toward Haiti. And some of those policies have been detrimental to the development of the country. If we go back to the 1980s, Haiti was self-sufficient in food agriculture. But during this period, under the U.S. pressure and also international organizations such as World Bank, Haiti was forced actually to liberalize trade. And what is the consequences? One of the consequences is that tariff import dropped from 50 to 3%. So resulting in international or imported food invading the country. This is one of the U.S. pressure, influence, or policies toward Haiti that deeply affect the agricultural sector, because with this situation, what happened is that, of course, imported food cost less in the country, and you have all the Haitian farmers with no capacity, no ability actually to continue to produce. Haiti was self-sufficient in 1980s, but today, 80% of Haitian foods are imported, mainly rice and from the United States. There is no way Haitian farmers can compete with farmers in the United States, for example. So, and if you are looking today at the immediate impact of the court, of the closure of the USAID in Haiti, one of the sectors that is severely affected is food security, food crisis. Of course, we have more than about half of the population of Haiti facing acute food insecurity today. And of course, the cut in aids really force organizations like the World Food Program, for example, to cut hot meals. They cannot continue, for example, to provide foods to those affected by the crisis. Those local organizations, farmer organizations that rely on this funding, for example, to try to build some sort of resilience toward climate change, now they have seen the support, the financial support from organizations that are partners vanish with these measures. But it's not only this. When you go into the healthcare. These cuts really affect the ability of organizations to actually provide HIV/AIDS services. Those were mainly supported by the US in Haiti. Now, more and more people now are left behind, or according to the data is available, there is an estimated of 30% of increase in HIV infections in the country. So looking at the impact, again, when you look at the protection sector, it is a protection that is underfunded in Haiti. And of course, with the cut of the US funding, what you have seen is that you have seen an increase in maternal death. You have seen pregnant women, breastfeeding women unable to access vital healthcare services. You have seen also those girls, those women affected by sexual violence in the country are unable to access services that their needs require. So looking back at the US policies, looking now at the cut in fundings, it's like, of course, you know that there is like very dire consequences of US influence in the country. But at the same time, it's like it's a bad necessary to have this funding, because of course, otherwise there is no way you can actually provide vital assistance to those that are the most, you know, disadvantaged, or those that are victim of the current crisis that we have. Now, to kind of understand the level of impact this cut has in the country, if you look, the humanitarian response plans in Haiti have always been underfunded. But this year, it was different. So, because as of July 2025, the level of funding, the fund raised for Haiti was only 8% out of 900 million US dollars needed this year to actually respond, to provide humanitarian response to the crisis. What does this mean? Is that in July you have 8%, probably at the end of the year you will be around 15, or I don't know, 25, but it's because the US was the main or the largest donor. The other donors, EU also cut funding and so on. And those, even though they are still present, they are not able actually to meet the gap that they cut from the US funding left. I'm sure probably later we can talk more, but I would tell you that as Mark told at the beginning, I am also, ActionAid is a member of CLIO, the platform of national and international NGOs. We conducted several surveys, from the beginning where the decisions were made with our members that receive funding from USAID. The impact is devastating. So 80% of US programs were immediately closed. Of course, later on, there will be some waivers for some organizations, but immediately the impact was very huge, and it's continued to affect the country. We have seen organizations closing a whole program, sending away all the staff, So it's affect not only in providing the necessary assistance to the population, but it also affect directly some young people that otherwise were not able to find a job, and so on and so on. So it's a mixed feeling. I know US influence, US policies toward Haiti have not been always good. And of course, it's contribute to what we are facing in the country today. But at the same time, this funding is necessary to help humanitarian organizations, to help development of organizations, to continue to work on the issue that the country is facing. And of course, for those local organizations, community-based organizations, youth organizations, women organizations, they are left out without the necessary means to continue to work in their programs at community level. So that's basically what I would say for now, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you. Million, impact of the USAID's closure.
Aha. Well, I agree on so many fronts with my sister Angelina. It's mixed. It was very, very bad on some sector, especially the health sector. Where I live in Uganda, for example, USAID was supporting over 800 doctors, over 14,000 nurses, people who are suffering from HIV. And it was also supporting some universities, in education. There was an education support. So when it was stopped, there was a lot of impact. Some of it good, because we oppose GMOs. So they were supporting the research on GMOs here and there. So I know, I've been told that, actually I don't know, but I've been told that a husband and a wife, a husband working in one organization supported by USAID, and his wife working in another organization again supported by USAID. They both lost their job suddenly. So there was that kind of shock, into the system. So that was very bad. That was very bad, and I felt the pain of all those people. And the wife of one of my colleague in NAFSA has lost her job also. So yeah, so these things have happened. But on another stance, I think, as I said before, USAID was supporting so many bad projects in Africa, especially in agriculture. As my brother Daniel was recounting the Ghana's experience, most of the time in countries all over Africa, what they were doing is prying open African markets, African agriculture to the interest of the US companies, and also driving the continent to a path, past dependence, basically. And so there was no support from USAID on agroecology, for example. Agroecology is a bigger agenda for us. There was no support. There was no support for farmers' managed system, for example, in the seed sector. There was a lot of work on privatizing land, land for farmers themselves, cadastral. There are a number of communal lands, so it's very easy to appropriate those lands once they are owned by somebody. But previously they were not owned, so there was a push for that kind of ownership also. So on so many fronts in terms of agriculture, in our view, when we wear the political economy lens and look at agriculture, I think the practice or the experience from USAID was very bad. I myself sat in three meetings organized by a number of actors supported by USAID. And the topic was biosafety laws, biosafety, regional biosafety harmonization. So in all of those meetings, there was a representative of USAID. They don't say anything, they don't raise their hand, they don't oppose, or they don't support. They just sit and observe. Um, and they were supporting this harmonization of biosafety regulations. In some countries, they were supporting also the change of laws for importation of fertilizers, chemical fertilizers. They supported the development of the agricultural strategies. The new CADAP, the Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program, was hugely, I know personally, because I participated in the process, influenced by USAID. It's not only USAID, there were a number of actors, but USAID was one of the actors. So it's mixed. It's mixed. I'm very sorry for those health sectors, some education, whatever. But I'm happy that they've gone in terms of their influence on agriculture, the future of African agriculture.
Joeva?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Angeline, Daniel, Millian have spoken really, well to the impacts on the ground. I think one of the things that I think about when it comes to the question of, what was it like to hear that USAID was shutting down? The first thing that kind of comes to my mind is the shock that a lot of people had, right? There's a lot of ink that's been spilled over, we didn't see this coming, no one saw this coming, right? Or how could this have happened? And one of the things that I find really interesting about this moment is, as Angeline, as Millian, as Daniel have all spoken to, USAID has long had this really kind of checkered history around the world. And I know we'll speak about its legacy separately. But because it's had this checkered legacy, those of us who are kind of tuned into that checkered legacy, I think it's like the question of what that felt like is kind of complex, right? As everyone is speaking to, it's this kind of complex thing of like, oh, this giant of USAID that has so much influence, that has been around for over 60 years, that it could just be kind of gone overnight. And I know for myself, the first time I heard that this was going to happen was I just happened to check Twitter one day, which I try really hard not to do these days because it's an awful place. But I just happened to check it on the day that Elon Musk tweeted that he had spent the weekend sending USAID to the wood chipper, right? And I went back and I counted, and in fact, that weekend, he tweeted about USAID like 15 times, just like really kind of obsessively tweeting about USAID. And so we have this sort of violent image that comes out, right? Sending this thing to the wood chipper. But I think that it's important to kind of set a larger context, which is that this has been a long time goal for a lot of major firms and players in Washington, D.C. to see USAID collapse or to go away or to transform directly. Under Trump, the first Trump administration, or what I call Trump 1.0, my colleague Jake Grumbach, who's a professor at UC Berkeley, he and I wrote a series of articles about how the USAID under Mark Green, under the first Trump administration, was working directly with the Heritage Foundation, with the American Enterprise Institute, and working directly with these far right or libertarian, however you want to identify them, organizations to craft USAID policy. And so it wasn't surprising to me then a few years later when Project 2025 comes out on the campaign trail that is also authored by the Heritage Foundation, where we learned that under Project 2025, the goal was to see USAID basically be dismembered for parts and sold for parts, right? This has long been the goal of the Heritage Foundation, and they were quite open about it for a long time, including under the first Trump administration. Under the first Trump administration, we also see the development of, for lack of better terms, the International Development Finance Corporation, which seeks to use U.S. cash or capital to directly invest in sort of like a private equity type way. And the Senate just confirmed last week Ben Black to run that. Ben Black is a son of a billionaire private equity investor, Leon Black. In other words, I think this has been a long time coming, right? And I think that it's not just the Trump administration, either 2.0 or 1.0, that has been working towards this, but there have been a lot of folks and institutions working behind the scenes. Daniel spoke about the Feed the Future initiative under Obama, which also looked to, kind of privatize agricultural development aid. But we can go back even further and look at George W. Bush's creation of the Millennium Challenge Corporation, right? Which essentially, in my, kind of professional opinion, went to countries like Ghana or like Zambia and said, we know you need infrastructural dollars. We'll give those to you with the following conditions. So not unlike structural adjustment of the World Bank or the IMF, the MCC was doing kind of similar types of tit for tat type work. And so, while the kind of overnight, what seemed to be an overnight closing of USAID was to me quite shocking, and just kind of how fast it was, I think I wasn't surprised at that was the outcome that happened because of this history. And I just think it's an important kind of piece of the puzzle to keep in mind when thinking about USAID and its legacy and where to go from here.
Thank you. Speaking of its legacy, Jane, give us this.
Actually, I'll go ahead and respond to a little bit more about this reaction and then talk about the legacy, if I may. Because actually, I'm going to take it back even further than Joeva did. In the mid-90s, the Congress then threatened to shut USAID down completely and or move it over to state. And the Clinton administration cut USAID staff drastically. And what that did is led to this privatization, because everything had to be contracted out because there were so few staff in USAID to undertake anything. And then that contracting out to NGOs and to private enterprises continued even after the staff number was augmented later on. So yeah, I think what you pointed out, that it wasn't entirely shocking. And by the way, too, it was one of the, I can't remember the quantity, but of the first, so Trump was inaugurated this time on, well, all presidents are inaugurated on January 19th. On January 20th is when Trump signed the act into place to dismantle it. But yes, it was the speed with which the money was stopped, despite it having been approved. That's the part that I think many of us, well, to say the least, weren't expecting, and still, yeah. Anyway, moving on. So focusing on the positive now, trying to switch a little bit, and with the acknowledgement that all of this is, USAID has always had to have everything approved at each step by Congress and by the president at whatever time it was working. It's had a lot of stop-starts in its work towards gender. Keeping in mind, like you said, Mark, it originated in 1961 deliberately, I mean, with the intent of creating allies for U.S. national security through fostering macroeconomic growth in certain poorer nations. Okay, that was its origin mission. And so macroeconomic growth can't be done. Well, you don't grow, the traditional way of growing nations' economies is not through any concern for its inequalities. And so initially, USAID wasn't going in that direction in terms of women or gender or anything else. But gradually, US policy towards assistance changed. And so since the early 70s, there's been this gradual evolution, or there was this gradual evolution of USAID to be broader and deeper in this regard. And so to focus on that, and so, yes, I want to say that specifically the agency evolved first with only concerns for heteronormative women, and then later more widely, okay, and deeply in terms of gender relations, disability status, sexuality, and eventually local control over development and aid. None of that was brought to full fruition. None of that was brought to the full satisfaction of everybody concerned with these issues. And in fact, none of those were even fully staffed by the end of 2024. So it was all still a work in process. Where things went, I think I can argue, did go well. The first one was that, and I think this should be celebrated. This really, we should not forget this. And this is nonpartisan and highly influential. USAID had an exceptional emphasis on data generation. And I don't mean just collecting information. I mean, it's collection, analysis, and dissemination to anyone who was interested. And it improved that practice with time. And moreover, and this is really, really important to those of us who work on disparities, those data were disaggregated by sex, age, disability status, and ethnicity. All right. And I can state from my experience with full knowledge that many, if not most, institutions involved in development and aid, even if those institutions are mandated to collect disaggregated data and for and about their activities and to make those data public, don't do so. All right. So the data collected by USAID are useful. I'll get in a minute to where I'm saying why I'm using the present tense rather than the past tense there. But the data are useful not only for development and aid practitioners, but also they've been useful for governments and private sector interests, which is, anyway, that's kind of ironic given the justification given for AIDS being shut down. And I will also say that USAID's demographic and health surveys created not only a resource, but a model. And even though I'm sure some of the other researchers on this webinar listening, like I, feel like some of the indicators could have been improved, it became this enormous and comparative ongoing data set that became available. And it reached far beyond the macroeconomic and into the household level. So, like I said, a model for others, even though other nations and institutions have changed the indicators somewhat. So a second positive legacy was that as USAID started putting more emphasis on equality, it put it into all of its programs and policies, those and internal hiring practices as well. And USAID created a very specific set of instructions on how to do all of this systematically. So, which again, these have become a model. These, again, they're tweaked, they're used differently by different places around the world, including those that don't accept USAID or US government money, but they were useful tools. Plus, all of these policies and practices were adopted based on research. And they took into consideration public comments from thousands of us who were already working in related areas. So those were two of the influences that, and on donors as well, that I think should be marked. Third, that, and this is where my work came in, the USAID requirement to undertake baseline studies and analyses regarding disparities within each context where development activities were being planned. That became almost standard practice for development worldwide. And so this evidence-based approach to doing development and aid, it's still not always there, but it especially wasn't there before this became, like I said, systematically standardized and required by USAID. And with USAID's relatively great position, large position, I mean, yes, that also had a huge influence. And then the fourth and final positive influence I want to discuss, well, it had some negative unintended consequences because of backlashes, but then it had more positive outcomes because of ripple effects. And these were USAID projects that were funded specifically to help women gain opportunities. And for that work, just to summarize, USAID emphasized three areas, and they tend to be referred to within development as women's economic empowerment, women, peace and security, and women's leadership. And I would say that it's, in my, over the years working with these different types of research to help with the design of such projects, I felt like the transparency increased, the evaluations got better, and especially, of course, it was great that everything moved beyond just helping heteronormative women and girls, and also included targets to make conditions, to keep conditions positive, if not necessarily disproportionately privileging for men and boys. And they help to inspire work done by others. So
Thank you. And thank you all for a really rich and nuanced conversation about this very important institution. Let's pivot a little bit. Moving forward, what do you think the future of aid should or should not look like? Are there lessons from USAID to be learned and applied? If we can start with you, Million. What do you think the future of aid should or should not look like, and lessons from USAID to be learned and applied?
Thank you very much. I have a few points, probably three, four. I mean, I am specific to the area that I'm working in on food systems in an agriculture area. I think the biggest lesson was that development should not be imposed or cannot be imposed, it must emerge from the base, from the people. Any kind of development to support what's happening there, the positive things that are happening. It does not mean that, there are not new things coming to the development space, it's very much important to bring some things, but mostly it shouldn't be imposed. And there was a lot of imposition from your side. And one big understanding is that dependency weakens democracy, weakens also systems. That's what has happened. A lot of systems have crumbled because of the lack of support from your side. And I think what was concerning for the network, for our group, for the movement, was the path that we are told is that the kind of a right kind of path uh, creates also dependency. Farmers have knowledge about the soil, about the seeds, about the kind of agriculture that they were. They've been doing it for thousands of years, but that was relegated as backward, to the history. So agroecology was not entertained. In the CADAP, we could see that. And the fourth probably is finance should empower. It should not control. I think there is a lot of influence because money is coming from USAID, and a number of institutions were forced to do what they were not usually doing. So, what is the role of finance? You can read that kind of question. And sometimes scale does not equal success. Something that is scaled up does not mean that it is successful. You can scale bad practices actually, and you can scale up dependency. So scale does not equal to success. So these are the learnings that we have to learn from your side, and we feel that if we go into the direction of agroecology and food sovereignty, we're capable of feeding ourselves without the support of external institutions And that became very clear after the demise of USAID. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moving forward, what do you think the future of aid should or should not look like? Angeline, do you feel you want to add to this? What what lessons should have been learned and applied?
Well, thank you, Mark. I can just share some thoughts about it. What future of aid should look like? And I think working in Haiti and being a woman that's, you know, grown up in a very difficult situation. And today, after 4 decades of life, I have seen everyone in Haiti talking about development. And of course, we have been seeing both national, international organizations, multilateral organizations talking about development. We all saying the level of funding being poured into Haiti for development. We have seen mainly after the earthquake, right? 2010 earthquake, the biggest one, the level of funding that came into this country, and everyone was hoping that this would be the moment for the country to take the right direction, to really think about addressing the root causes of extreme poverty, of inequalities and social injustice, and so on and so on. And look at where we are today. Today we are in a complete, I would say, failing state. We have a political crisis, we have an economical crisis, a unprecedented humanitarian crisis, and security crisis, institutional crisis. So it's a very complex crisis that we are facing today in Haiti. You feel the despair. You feel that the population is desperate. They have been waiting for so long. And of course, a vast majority of the population lack trust in their governments, in the political wills of Haitian leaders to do something different. I have always said that in the state that Haiti is today, we are all desperate for security, for peace, but there can be no peace when you are living extreme poverty. There can be no peace when half of your population is facing food insecurity, right? So, of course, we know that the international community has been there for quite so long. The US itself, if we go back to history, 1915 till today, has a big influence on Haiti. Where are we going? Certainly, with the results that we have today, the model is not working. We need to change the status quo. And as I think it was Million said, development cannot happen when you are only being dictated what to do by some I would say so-called friends or supportive countries or allies and so on and so on. I think development will happen in Haiti, of course, with the international solidarity, but an international solidarity that respect and also show support to allow the Haitian population to sit together, to work together, to explore the alternative. We will not be able to put this country in another direction as long as we are still being influenced. Our economy is being influenced, our political is being influenced. Everything is this country is being influenced somehow or another by some allies, some partners of action, of Haiti. I think we need to start from the bottom up. We need to go into the communities. What is happening? Why are we here today? What hasn't worked? What worked? Of course, we can continue to build on what worked. you know, from back end. As Jen was saying, USAID was not totally, you know, bad for any country. There are some positive work. What can we build on? But what can we be addressed, not that need to be addressed differently? This is, for me, when looking at future of aid, we need to take seriously about localization of aid. And this really requires to put national actors in the center. That doesn't mean, and of course, there is a clear dynamic of power when talking about localization. What will happen with all the international NGOs, including ActionAid in Haiti? Does that mean they need to leave? There are like some deep questions to ask ourselves when talking about those issues, when talking or when visioning aid in the future. What does it mean when you are talking about protection? You are talking about food security. You are talking about so many issues. Of course, the nexus approach is important. We need to look at this and we need to have common understanding. When we talk about the nexus, if we want to bridge peace, development, humanitarian actions, what does that mean for a multinational organization? What does that mean for a UN agency? What does that mean for national, international NGOs? We still, you know, facing many challenges because we don't have common understanding about those issues. And of course, the nexus approach is very important if we want to go deep addressing the root causes of extreme poverty, the root causes of insecurity, of internal conflict, and so on and so on. So for me also, this requires future aid, also require to see those local actors, not just implementing partners, but organizations that are capable to access direct funding, to be able to develop themselves from governance, programmatic area, so to become the organizations that can really do what we international organizations claim ourselves capable of doing, right? So for me, the future of AIDS, it's looking at the root causes of the political crisis, of the economic crisis, of internal crisis, change the status quo, look at other way of working, understand that there is a clear dynamic of power and what we are willing to live on, to live for those that we want to put in the center, because of course they cannot do it without access to technology, without access to funding, without access to capacity, and so on and so on. So that's I would stop here because we have very short time and there are many other colleagues to react. But for me, that's it. Look at the localization in real, look at the nexus approach, what it does it mean for us in terms of funding, who has access to the funding, and of course, find a way for local communities, local actors to sit together, to explore together the alternative. And of course, if necessary, the international can actually support in the way they need to, where there is a gap, where there is the necessity to support. Thank you.
Thank you. Jane, what do you think the future of aid should or should not look like? Are there lessons from USAID to be learned and applied?
So I really appreciate being given the opportunity to follow right on Angeline's, because so much of what she said, I feel like, yeah, I'm just going to echo in a way. The increased, you know, it should have, and we need to still increase better coordination between, you know, longer term development investment and shorter term humanitarian aid response. I mean, that's been talked about, but it's not happened. And we also need to increase, you know, I don't think we should throw away research, you know, that these baseline studies, the need for baseline studies, you know, depending on the context, but also we need to speed things up in terms of the recommendations, the responses to the research. That just, you know, never happened. And as you all know, and Million was talking about this, and this has happened, there's a proliferation of climate and military related disasters and what have been labeled fragile states. And this goes back to Angeline's point, but also, all of these things need to connect together. I know that. Okay, so the good news is, I think it's good news. I don't know if everybody would agree, but there are now almost 24 multilateral development banks in existence, many of them in Asia and Africa now. But so there are many more opportunities and options and allies to help with loans and grants. There's still loans and grants. They're still not getting rid of the problem that Mignon was talking about of ending outside development altogether, ending outside connections altogether, but at least they're more regional and locally connected than just the World Bank, for example, or the IMF. But not that those necessarily need to go away, but yes, there are just many more opportunities, and the people from the World Bank are talking about this as positive as well. I also feel like things are just going to change. So again, trying to not just focus on the negative, but maybe to try to, and what I have to say on a somewhat positive note is, with this dispersal of so many experts in so many areas, I've seen a lot of new services and systems arising. So hopefully they will continue to affect everyone. And for example, former USAID staff located and salvaged all of those data that I was talking about a moment ago that were going to be erased. So they have salvaged them and are now making them available once again. So that's through a new enterprise that they've formed. So I'm not sure about the public-private arguments. I don't think that that's anything new. I know that I'm not. Yeah, and I also know. I know that a lot of the foundations are, as fast as they can, getting rid of any emphasis on inequality, getting rid of any emphasis on diversity. So I don't think that's a good direction, but anyway, perhaps that will make things more streamlined.
Thank you, Jane. Joeva? Future of
Yeah.
aid.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to be the anthropologist that I am and say that I think this isn't a moment to really dream big. I think in the moments of destruction, like we're seeing now, there are opportunities to really imagine, like, what do we want this world to look like? And as I talked with my students a lot about, rather than think about what could development be, I like to think about what would it take in order for countries all around the world, whether the US, whether Ghana, Haiti, and so on and so forth, to be able to provide an excellent quality of life for all of the people who live there, right? And so in doing so, I think the good news is, as Jane mentioned, there's a lot of people who care very deeply about this type of work and making the world a better and more equitable place. And as we've been hearing from Angeline and Daniel and Million, there are a lot of people who have already been working on these alternatives, right? And already working to build power around them and to build the case for them. And so when I think about this question, I think a lot about how can we center ideas of justice in moving forward. And when I think of justice, I think of tax justice, which I won't speak to because I'm sure Daniel will. I think of things like tax justice. I think of things like debt relief, right? And really strong calls to relieve the crippling debt of many countries around the world. I think about calls, especially those coming from Caribbean nations, for reparations, and for European countries and for the United States to come to the table and think really seriously about what that might look like. And then I think also about, there's been a lot of talk about private foundations and philanthropy and whether or not they can come in and kind of fill the gap. And I think when I think about that question, one of the things I think about is whether the really big philanthropies, the really big players, whether they will kind of cede some of their power and start to engage in direct giving, as we see some foundations doing now, but really kind of engage in direct giving, trusting people on the ground who have already been doing this work. And so I agree with Angeline that I think the status quo is going to have to change if we want to really be thinking seriously about how countries around the world can improve the quality of life for everyone. But I think now is as good of time as ever to think about what that would take.
Thank you. Daniel, moving forward,
Yes.
the future should not look like.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and thanks to the previous speakers. I think that a lot of them, in fact, all of them, have touched on some of the few points. But I think first and foremost, let us understand it is reducing. And for me, who works within the trade union circles, I look at not just only at USAID, but the other funding organizations. And so let us face the reality on the ground. Aid is reducing. Now, secondly, I think we should be able to underscore the fact that aid, and by example, what USAID seeks to do is to address the outcome of the problems caused by a system that does not work for all. So for example, if you look at taxes or tax justice, it is we are campaigning around tax justice because we are facing a system or an economic system fueled by classical economics, neoliberal open market or free market orthodoxy, where multinational companies and corporations have so much power and so have what it takes to plan their taxes so that they do not pay their fair share of taxes. If you look at the situation in Congo at the moment, there's a sharp contrast between what is happening in Congo and the fact that multinational companies and their countries are moving natural resources out of Congo on a daily basis. If you look at inequality, so if you go into a typical community where USAID is supporting to address the problems of inequality, it is doing so because inequality is an outcome of a system that has failed. The problem of corruption, the problem of climate, because corporations have decided that there's no going to be any consequences to the destruction of the environment. If you look at public services, if USAID is funding projects to develop certain schools in our communities, is a clear example that governments have failed to invest or fund or finance public services, finance public health, finance public schools, finance roads, finance energies. If you look at, for example, why it became very, very profitable for the Millennium Challenge account to push Ghana to privatize our energy sector, it was clearly because the system was dysfunctional. There was massive corruption. So the point we must all understand is that yes, what USAID does, plus other funding, other cooperation agencies or development partners, what they seek to do is to address the outcome of a system that has failed to deliver on its promise. That said, I would say that the role for international development, it's clear it can help, it can work to some extent, but it will continue, whichever form it comes in, it will continue to face the situation of USAID without a region or a continent or a developing country or a people defining its own development pathway within the context of, for example, the current geopolitics. Look at US, Brazil, India, Russia, China. Countries and developing countries must rise up and ask it the question of whether it wants to operate within the current economic system, because the fact that there's geopolitical crisis is enough for us to ask ourselves these questions. The rise of nationalists and right-wing governments, and in fact, the issue of digitalization of our economies, what Yanis will call techno-feudalism. We should ask ourselves, within this context, what kind of economies do we want for ourselves, whether in Haiti or in Ethiopia, Uganda, or wherever? We should ask ourselves these questions. Look at migration. And in fact, more recently, look at the various protests that are emerging in various countries, from Ghana to Kenya to Madagascar to Nepal. Young people are asking that we've been waiting for a system to provide us jobs. It has failed. We've been waiting for a system to provide us wealth. It has failed. We've been waiting for a system to provide us, a good future for ourselves and our families. It has failed. And so they are asking ourselves, where do we go from here? That is how come they are protesting. And so before we talk about development aid and whether it will work or not, we need to start to rethink a new economy for developing countries. Developing countries must come together to say, what kind of economy do we want for ourselves? Let's make proposals for, against austerity, proposals regarding privatization and the fact that it doesn't serve the interests of citizens. Let's make proposals on debts and debt relief. Let's make several proposals, but ultimately we should ask ourselves, what kind of economy do we want for ourselves? And for me, these things provide what is happening with USAID plus other agencies provides us an opportunity to ask ourselves, what kind of economy do we want? Last 2 points, the point about domestic resource mobilization. It is key that countries who, for example, if you look at countries that have been severely hit by USAID withdrawing support, especially in the area of health, is because these countries are not able to mobilize enough resources domestically. And so we need to start talking about taxes. We need to talk about the governance of taxes and tax policies that ensures that we are able to generate enough revenue to fund all these public services. I mean, in Ghana some time ago when we discovered oil, there was a discussion around setting up special initiatives, and this one I will specifically focus on agriculture. Special initiatives around the revenues we generate from the extractives to fund agriculture. Countries developing countries should be talking about these things, should go back to the drawing board to say, we can't grow without food. And if we can't grow without food, it means that we can't leave the future of food in the hands of a funding or a development agency. It must be in our hands, it must be in our control. And so must the seed be in our control, and so must the technology of food be in our control. So I think that for me, these are some of the key points I want to raise around whether development aid will work. Before talking about whether it will work or not, we must look at some of these things before we talk about because from where we sit, we all know that it's not going to increase any moment from now. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you. Thank you all. Daniel, thank you. Million, thank you. Joeva, thank you. Jane, thank you. Angeline, for a very enlightening and ultimately, I would argue, inspiring call to action, call to reflection, and really highlighting the role that we play in thinking through the important issues of the day. Love the way you ended, Daniel, with some questions. Just reminded me of how my first book, Killing with Kindness, ended. I would ask people anything that they would ask of me, and a street merchant in Haiti may or may not have been literate. I didn't ask, I didn't care. When I asked, what can we do as a US citizen? And she said, I appreciate the question, but before you can talk about how you can help Haiti, what you got to do, you have to bring democracy back to Washington. So it reminds us all of our roles in bringing this home. So thank you for attending. Thank you for a very for your presence, for attention. I know it's Zoom is a long time to be sitting for an hour and a half. I do want to announce that we have a couple events in the series. I'm going to put them in the chat so you can see. Our next event in the community engaged research is Monday, November 3rd. Carrie Birchfeld, from Animal Crime to Animals Helping Criminals, academic, advocate, activist, or all of the above. And then on Wednesday, the 5th of November, Solidarity and Resilience, Adapting to Cuba's Disaster Risk Reduction and Climate Change Adaptation in Haiti. On behalf of the Center for Nonprofit and NGO Studies at Northern Illinois University and our co-sponsors at the TIG at the SFAA and at Stony Brook University. Thank you all for coming. For those who are interested in having the QR code for the Honors Connect, I will post that. I will share that right now, but we can go ahead and stop the recording and then do stay in touch. Continue the work that you're all doing, and thank you all for sharing your time with us today.
Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Good night and bye-bye.
Has the recording stopped? Laura, I'm going to ask to be the host again. We can stop the recording. There you are. Wonderful.